All right, welcome back to learning the no BS mentality. Today we have lesson two, and in today's lesson, what I want to do is I want to flip a current societal norm that's really been ingrained in us that our 20s are our time to have fun and have no responsibilities and really find ourselves. And that once we kind of approach 30 or get into our 30s, that's our time to lock in and settle down and join the real world. All right, what I want to do is I want to flip that. All right, I want to flip that mentality into building in our 20s so that we can actually live in our 30s and the decades to follow. Okay, so let's go over kind of society's default path. Okay, really what society is having us do is they want us to drift through our 20s, right? You do your 4 years of college, right? You have fun, you party, right? You have no responsibility, and you get your education, right? And then, right, once we graduate college, right, now all of a sudden we realize that our degree doesn't just automatically mean we're going to go get a good high paying job out of college, right? So typically what happens is you end up moving back in with your parents for a couple years, right? You enjoy another few years of kind of no responsibility, right? And you're trying to kind of catch up at that point. And maybe by 28, right, you kind of start to get to your shit together. But kind of once we get to our 30s, now we start to panic, right? Because now we have this responsibilities. We have a ton of expenses, right? And now we wanna settle down. We want a family, right? We want a house and a car and all of this stuff, right? So what we do is we settle for stability, right? Not ambition, right? And that's gonna lead to decades of maintaining, right? Trying to catch up instead of building. Okay. Kind of what the no BS mentality, the path that the no BS mentality wants is that we want to be intentional in our 20s. Okay. We want to lock in and we want to build financially and physically so that we can carry momentum into our 30s, so that we can have options and freedom, right? Moving forward in our 30s and the decades to follow. So in today's lesson, right, I'm going to kind of start off by getting into why it's so important to lock in our 20s and why it's not really possible to do that kind of once you get into your 30s. And then we're going to go over kind of some mindset shifts, right? Ways to reframe the way we kind of see things, reframe some of the things that society's been telling us in order to actually accomplish this goal of locking in into our 20s. So without further ado, let's get into it. One of the reasons it is so important to start building in our 20s is because of the compounding effect. Okay. When we're young, our ability to accomplish the things we want to build over the course of our lives exponentially increases. All right. In our 20s, skills compound exponentially. All right. Our ability to learn is exponentially higher because our brains are more moldable. All right. Our ability to gain experience is also exponentially higher because our abilities to handle the risk and the failure associated with gaining experience is exponentially higher. All right. Money compounds. We want to invest early. And I'm not just talking about in stocks, okay? If your goal is to get into something with really high financial upside, such as entrepreneurship or sales or content creation, right? All these things take time to become profitable. And the earlier we can invest in these things financially, the better, all right? Physical health compounds, okay? We all know how important it is to be in shape over the course of our lives, okay? But it's really hard to get into shape when we're in our 30s or in our 40s. So we want to be in shape and do all the things it takes to get into shape in our 20s so that when we are 30 and 40, all we have to do is maintain what we've already built. Okay. Finally, our reputation compounds. Okay. We all want to be known for something, and our ability to market ourselves and create a personal brand is exponentially higher in our 20s. Okay. Look, all right, if you're locking in for 5 years at 20, you're not just 5 years ahead, you're 10 to 15 years ahead because all of these things compound at exponential rates. Moving on. Another reason it is so important to start building your 20s is because of this myth that you have time. Okay, we all think that our 20s equals an infinite runway to success. Okay, that's not true. You do not have time. All right, and the reason you do not have time is because as we get older, our energy declines. Our ability to pull the all nighters and work 18 hours a day and do all the things that it takes to accomplish great things, it all starts to go away. All right, on top of that, our responsibilities increase. Okay, maybe you have a family, you definitely have bills. And on top of that, what it takes to maintain our health increases the older we get. Finally, our risk tolerance drops. All right. The older we get, the more we naturally want to seek stability rather than ambition. Okay. And the longer you wait to start, the less ambitious you're going to be, and the more you're going to limit your ability to accomplish some of the great things you could have accomplished. Okay. Look, it's not that it's impossible to change your life in your 30s, but it's way, way harder than trying to change your life in your 20s. All right. Moving on. Okay, now I want to start reshaping our mentality and start reframing some of these ideologies that society has ingrained in us. The first thing I want to reframe is this idea that society has created that our 20s is for finding ourselves. Okay, a lot of you guys use finding yourself as an excuse to kind of drift through your 20s. A lot of times that means traveling, clubbing, and sleeping around. Okay, we want to reframe finding yourself into building yourself in your 20s. Okay, identity comes from action, not endless exploration. Okay, if you spend years trying everything but committing to nothing, you're not gaining clarity. All right, you're delaying it. Okay, we want to change this idea of passive self discovery, which is traveling, clubbing, and trying random things. And we want to switch it over to active self creation, which is learning skills, building discipline, creating a network, and maintaining your health. Okay, moving on. The next thing I want to reframe is I want to reframe our definition of the word freedom. Okay, we all want freedom, but a lot of us get caught up in a very short term definition of freedom where freedom means doing whatever we want right now. And that's really what leads to a lot of us just kind of drifting through our 20s. What we want to change is we want a long term definition of freedom where freedom equals control over our time, our income, and our choices later on in life. Okay, when you drift through your 20s, you're borrowing time from your future and you're going to spend the rest of your life paying it back. Okay. And we're going to talk more about kind of short term mindset versus long term mindset because that's a big part of kind of the mentality I'm trying to teach. And that's going to end up being its own episode. All right. Moving on. The next thing we need to reframe if you really do want to achieve great things is you need to redefine your definition of fun. Okay. And you need to understand that discipline does not equal misery. Because the fact is in order to build in your 20s, it requires a lot of discipline. All right. You have to make a lot of sacrifices and you have to have a mindset that's completely different from the majority of the people your age. Okay. And as corny as it sounds, our fun needs to come from making progress, winning, learning, gaining respect. Okay. Building something real. And we need to replace cheap dopamine, such as partying, scrolling, video games, and other forms of instant validation, with earned satisfaction, right? Growth, mastering skills, gaining independence, gaining financial freedom. Okay, moving on. Okay, the last thing we need to reframe is we need to reframe our environment. Okay, I've talked about this before and I'm probably going to end up talking about it again because your surroundings are really important. All right, your group sets your baseline. Okay, if your friends are drifting through their 20s, so will you. But if you surround yourself with people that are also trying to build in their 20s, you will grow with them. Okay, moving on. One last thing before we wrap up this lesson, okay? I came up with the idea of the 3 to 5 year transformation challenge. And I know it sounds crazy, right? A challenge that lasts 3 to 5 years. But the fact is, I think if you really commit to some of these things, you can change your life. All right. And the idea is that, right, you spend a year, right, gaining skills and gaining clarity. Okay. When it comes to skills, it's a matter of just learning all these methods that some of these people use to really break away from the average person, right? Gain wealth, etc. And then from a clarity standpoint, right? That's just about learning that you do live in a system, right? There is a default path that society has kind of ingrained in us, and just reframing your mindset around those things, just like we discussed in today's lesson, all right, in a way that's going to allow us to really build in our 20s. Okay. Year 2 to 3, right? That's where we actually start to see some income growth, right? You found a path that you like and you've committed to it, right? And now you're seeing income growth. And because you chose a path and you stuck to it, right? It's opened the door for other opportunities, okay? And you're 4 through 5, right? That's when you start to see a real shift in your lifestyle, right? You've been able to leverage all these things you've done over the course of the last 3 years in a way that you have now set yourself apart from the average person. All right, moving on. All right, to wrap up today's lesson, we need to understand that building your 20s does not mean you need to be miserable or isolated, okay? Balance does exist, all right? But most people overestimate how much fun they really need to have. And the fact is if you want an above average life, you can't have average timing, okay? We also need to understand that the consequences of not building your 20s are real, all right? If you don't build in your 20s, all right, there's a very good chance you're going to end up stuck in a job that you hate, all right? With severe financial stress in your 30s, 40s, and beyond, and regret from knowing that you could have been different, all right, from knowing that you could have done great things, okay? Finally, all right, I want you guys to imagine, all right, you wake up at 30 with options, okay? No need for permission, not from your boss, not from money, okay? Your time is yours, all right? You can relax, you can travel, and you can do what you want with your time for the rest of your life, okay? Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next lesson.